A huge man in cloth of gold, legs braced wide, jewelled hat, hands on hips, staring you down from a portrait. 6 wives, 2 beheaded, monasteries smashed, a whole church torn away from Rome. That's the Henry VIII most people know, the wife-killing, turkey-leg-gnawing tyrant. But the real Henry is far more complicated and, in many ways, far more frightening. He began as a charming, athletic Renaissance prince who loved music, theology and poetry. He died a sick, suspicious, brutal king who'd changed England forever. In this beginner's guide to Henry VIII, I'm going to walk you through his life and reign, his achievements and the good he did, the darker tyrannical side, his 6 wives and the famous divorced, beheaded, died, the break with Rome and why Henry died a Catholic, not a Protestant, his legacy and why we're still obsessed with him today. I'm historian and author Claire Ridgway, and let's dive into the world of Henry VIII. Henry VIII was born on the 28th of June 1491 at Greenwich Palace, the second son of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. He wasn't meant to be king. That job belonged to his elder brother Arthur. When Arthur died in April 1502, 10-year-old Henry suddenly became heir to a brand new dynasty. 7 years later, in April 1509, at just 17, he inherited the throne, and with it, huge expectations. His contemporaries were ecstatic. After Henry VII's rather harsh last years, this handsome, athletic, educated young prince looked like a new dawn. Envoys and courtiers raved about him. The scholar Erasmus was told that the heavens laugh, the earth exults, now that Henry VIII had taken the throne. He was praised as a lover of justice, a friend to learning, a true Renaissance prince. And at first he really was. Henry was skilled at languages, music, theology and astronomy, a talented sportsman, jousting, hunting, real tennis. Charming, charismatic and deeply interested in humanist learning. But over nearly 38 years on the throne, that golden image would darken. Before we get to the blood and beheadings, it's important to recognise what Henry did achieve. Even historians who dislike him admit that he reshaped England. Number 1, the English Navy. Henry didn't invent the Navy, but he massively expanded it. His father left a handful of royal warships. Henry left more than 40. He oversaw the building of famous ships like the Mary Rose. He created royal dockyards at Deptford, Woolwich and Portsmouth. He set up a Navy board to manage this growing force, and this laid the foundations for the naval power that England would become in later centuries. Number 2, the Church of England. At least structurally, Henry's break with Rome meant that, for the first time, the English monarch, not the Pope, was head of the Church in his realm. Under the Act of Supremacy of 1534, Henry was declared supreme head of the Church in England. The Church in England became a national church, tied closely to the Crown. It was still Catholic in doctrine under Henry, but structurally something new had begun. Number 3, the English Bible and religious change. In his reign, the Bible was translated into English for public use. In 1538 and 1541, injunctions ordered an English Bible, the so-called Great Bible, to be available in every parish church. You could argue that Henry didn't intend a full Protestant Reformation, but he certainly opened the door to one. Number 4, government and parliament. Henry relied heavily on powerful ministers, Wolsey, More, Cromwell, but under them and under his authority, government changed. The so-called Reformation Parliament, 1529 to 1536, transformed Parliament from an occasional tax-granting body into a central tool of government and religious change. Laws touched every aspect of national life, including doctrine, which had previously been the Church's domain. Parliament, and particularly Crown in Parliament, emerged as the ultimate law-making authority. That development echoes right through to modern Britain. Number 5, patron of the arts and the Renaissance. Henry was a major patron of the arts, employing Hans Holbein the Younger, whose images still define Henry in our minds. He commissioned rich tapestries like the Abraham series at Hampton Court. He staged magnificent events like the Field of Cloth of Gold with Francis I of France. He helped bring Renaissance culture, taste and art more deeply into the English court. Number 6, forts, palaces and Ireland. Henry built or remodelled numerous palaces, for example Nonsuch, St James's, Whitehall and the extensive work at Hampton Court Palace. He threw up a chain of coastal forts to defend against invasion. And in 1542, Henry was declared King of Ireland, turning the old lordship into a kingdom firmly under the English crown, at least in theory. Number 7, a stable succession, sort of. Like his father, Henry managed to pass the crown to a legitimate male heir, Edward VI, without civil war. For a dynasty only founded in 1485, that was no small achievement. Most people can rattle off the rhyme divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. But for a beginner's guide, here's a quick snapshot. Catherine of Aragon, Spanish princess, his brother Arthur's widow, married to Henry for over 20 years, multiple pregnancies, but only Mary, the future Mary I, survived. When she couldn't give him a son, Henry sought an annulment, the great matter. Cast aside, separated from her daughter, died in 1536, still calling herself queen. Anne Boleyn, clever, charismatic, reform-minded. Henry's desire for her led to him breaking with Rome. Mother of Elizabeth I. In 1536, she was arrested and executed on charges of adultery, incest and treason. Charges many historians, including me, believe were fabricated. Jane Seymour, demure, seemingly obedient, presented as Anne's opposite, gave Henry the only thing he wanted most, a legitimate son, Edward, in 1537. Died shortly after childbirth. Henry chose to be buried with her. Anne of Cleves, a political match from Cleves in modern-day Germany. Henry famously claimed he was not attracted to her, and he had their marriage annulled. She wisely accepted a settlement and outlived all Henry's other wives, and the king himself. Catherine Howard, young, lively, and disastrously ill-prepared for the scrutiny of being queen. Executed after her past sexual history came to light, along with her secret meetings with a certain Thomas Culpeper. Henry had the law changed so that he could execute her lady, Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, despite signs of mental breakdown. Catherine Parr, learned, reform-sympathetic, and politically astute. She almost fell victim to a plot by Conservatives at court, but talked her way back into Henry's favour. She outlived him and went on to marry for a 4th time. The 6 wives aren't just a gimmick. Through them, we see Henry's dynastic anxiety, his capacity for cruelty, and the factional battles of his court. Now, here's an interesting question. Was Henry VIII really Protestant? Short answer, no. Yes, he broke from Rome. He made himself supreme head of the church in England. He dissolved the monasteries. But the theology was another matter. Early in his reign, Henry wrote Defence of the Seven Sacraments against Martin Luther. The Pope rewarded him with the title Defender of the Faith, still used by British monarchs today. When he broke with Rome in the 1530s, it was about his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and his passion for Anne Boleyn, about his desperate need for a male heir, about power and jurisdiction, not Protestant doctrine. He still believed in the Mass and transubstantiation, purgatory, clerical celibacy, and confession. In 1539, the Act of 6 Articles strongly reaffirmed traditional Catholic teaching and punished anyone, usually Protestants, who denied it. Under Henry, Protestants were burnt for denying the Mass. Catholics were executed for rejecting his supremacy. It was a confusing and dangerous time. At his death in January 1547, Henry had a mass said for his soul, received last rites, requested prayers for the dead, and he'd never legalised priestly marriage. He died essentially as a Catholic king who had thrown off the Pope, not as a Protestant reformer. The full Protestant Reformation in England came later, especially under Edward VI and Elizabeth I. And now we come to the side of Henry VIII that has fascinated and horrified people for centuries. Henry the Tyrant. Even many of his contemporaries thought he was a tyrant. Some of the reasons: scapegoats and convenient executions. Early in his reign, he had Empson and Dudley executed, likely as scapegoats for his father's unpopular policies. He later turned on powerful men like Thomas More, Bishop Fisher, and Thomas Cromwell when they crossed him or outlived their usefulness. Members of old noble families like the Poles and the elderly Margaret Pole were executed, more for who they were than what they'd done. The dissolution of the monasteries, hundreds of religious houses closed, their lands and treasures seized. Monasteries had acted as local hospitals, schools, almshouses, and care homes. Their destruction caused real social and economic dislocation. Whatever abuses existed, Henry's motives were strongly financial and political. And then there's brutality in religion. People like Elizabeth Barton, the Holy Maid of Kent, were executed when their visions challenged his policies. The Carthusian monks of London Charterhouse, who'd refused to acknowledge his supremacy, were hanged, drawn and quartered, hanged in chains, or left to starve. Then there's the Pilgrimage of Grace, a huge northern rebellion that started in 1536, protesting religious change and economic grievances. Henry promised mercy, then had the leaders and many others brutally executed. Orders went out to hang monks and abbots conspicuously as a warning to others. And then there's Acts of Attainder. Henry used Parliament to condemn people without a normal trial. Around 130 people were attainted in his reign, many during just 8 years. And he changed laws, for example, allowing the execution of the mentally ill, to clear obstacles in his path. Foreign policy and violence. He spent vast sums on wars in France and Scotland, achieving little lasting territorial gain. He was involved in plots to kidnap or assassinate enemies abroad like Cardinal Pole and William Tyndale. Contemporaries compared him to Nero and other classical tyrants. One priest during the Pilgrimage of Grace called him a tyrant more cruel than Nero, for Nero destroyed but part of Rome, but this tyrant destroyeth this whole realm. For me, even when I factor in the brutality of the age, Henry VIII still stands out as a tyrant. A product of his time, yes, but also extreme, even in that context. But what about his legacy? How is Henry VIII viewed today? How do historians judge him? Some emphasise his achievements. David Starkey has called him the king who reinvented England and carried royal power to its peak. Others point to his role in the birth of a national church, a stronger parliament, and a more centralised state. Others focus on the damage. Historians like Robert Hutchinson paint a picture of a paranoid, increasingly cruel ruler driven by ego and appetite. Critics highlight the social cost of his policies, the executions, and the instability he created. I'd say this: Henry VIII was capable, intelligent, and politically shrewd, but he was also cruel, self-indulgent, and dangerously ruthless. He didn't carefully design the English Reformation. He stumbled and forced his way through it to solve his personal problems, and in doing so unleashed forces he couldn't control. Why are we still fascinated by Henry VIII? Why does this one king out of so many still loom so large? A few reasons. Drama. 6 wives, executions, love affairs, rebellions, a whole church torn from Rome. His life reads like a soap opera written by a dramatist with a taste for blood. Transformation. England at his death looked very different from England at his accession. Religiously, politically, culturally. He sits right at the turning point between medieval and early modern. Personality. We have Holbein's iconic images, his own words, love letters to Anne Boleyn, accounts of his temper and charm. He feels vivid and disturbingly human. Moral questions. Henry forces us to ask, can someone who does great things also be monstrous? How do we weigh achievements against cruelty? For many of us, and I include myself here, Henry is a fascinating monster. I can admire his intelligence and political impact, but I don't excuse his brutality. So, to summarise, Henry VIII was born a second son and became king at 17. He began as a Renaissance golden boy and ended as a fearful, obese and dangerous tyrant. He expanded the navy, reshaped government and began the structural break from Rome that would lead to the Church of England. He married 6 times, executed 2 queens and caused immense suffering to friends, foes and family. He broke with the Pope but died a Catholic in doctrine, not a Protestant reformer. His legacy is a mix of state building and devastation, of cultural splendour and cruelty, and that tension continues to fascinate us. I'd love to know what you think. Do you see Henry more as a great state builder or as a tyrant who happened to do some important things along the way? Do let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this beginner's guide to Henry VIII, please like this video, subscribe and ring the bell for more Tudor history. And I'll link to my other Henry VIII videos in the description if you'd like to go deeper into his faith, his wives, and his reputation as a tyrant. Thank you for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.